Advanced Financial Modeling, Topic 12, International Finance, Learning Adjunctive number 2. We're going to calculate currency appreciations for direct and indirect currency quotes. So calculating appreciation has a very simple formula. If you look at this formula, it's the new exchange rate minus the old exchange rate over the old exchange rate. So it's the classic percent change formula, new minus old over old value. However, there's direct and indirect exchange rates, so it's not so clear. When you use this percent change formula, new minus old over old, it's telling you what would the appreciation or depreciation of the base or denominator currency. Now, what the heck does that mean? Say the exchange rates you're using are dollar price of a euro. Say, went from $1.10 to a different value. In this case, if we apply the percent change formula to this exchange rate with the new and old value, it's telling you what happened to the euro, since that is the price of the euro. So this percent change formula tells you what happens to the, we'll call it the denominator currency or the base currency. If I wrote this in these terms, it would be the base currency, which is that first one. If you want to talk about what happened to the other currency, say what was the appreciation or depreciation of the dollar in terms of euros, you can't just change the sign, although sometimes it's pretty close. You have to invert the formula and do old minus new over new. So let's do an example. Say here's an old example when the exchange rates were really high in Europe. Say the euro goes from $1.50, that's the old value, to a new value of $1.65. Well, if I just do the new minus old over old, I get a 10% appreciation. That is the appreciation of the euro. Quoted in dollars, the dollar price of a euro is now 10% more expensive. So if you're an American, Paris hotels are now 10% more expensive. Now, for a Parisian, they want to know, well, what was the appreciation of the dollar in terms of euros? Well, if you want to know the euro price of a dollar, just flip all the exchange rates. 1 over 165, that's 1 over the new, minus 1 over the old, over 1 over the old. And you'll get minus 9%. Notice you just can't flip the sign. You can't just say plus 10 and minus 10. It's always a little bit different and sometimes a lot different. All right, so if you can always use the new minus old over old formula to calculate the appreciation of a currency, but it always tells you about the base currency. If you want to know that denominator currency, if you want to know about the other currency, that quote currency, you got to flip all the exchange rates. But there is a shortcut. Mathematically, 1 over new over minus 1 over old divided by 1 over old just happens to be old minus new over new. So if you want to know about that quote currency, just use that wrong percent change formula, old minus new over new, but mathematically it'll tell you what's happening to the quote currency. So in this case, the exchange rate went from 150 to 165. That's a 10% appreciation of the euro. So hotels for Americans are 10% more expensive. And for Europeans, hotels, for Parisians, hotels in New York are, say, 9% cheaper. So let's look at another one. Say the USD CAD goes from 105 to 103. Now let's talk about that exchange rate. That's the price of $1 quoted in CAD. So that's the CAD price of $1 US, and it went from 105 to 103. So what we can say is the dollar got less valuable, right? It went from used to cost 105 CAD, now it costs 103. So if I use the new minus old over old formula, I can see that the dollar has devalued by 1.905% against the CAD. And that percent change formula tells me about the dollar because this is the Canadian price of a dollar. If you want to know what was the appreciation of the CAD, the Canadian for an American, flip all those numbers or just do old minus new over new, and you can see the CAD actually appreciated in 1.94%. And here are some more examples if you want to go take a look at these, looking at the appreciations of these currencies up here. One last slide in this section, why currency appreciation is important. Well, if you know the euro devalued 10% against the dollar, and you're an American company, well, the US dollar revenue of your euro-denominated receivables just fell 10%. So you sold the same amount of goods to the Europeans, but because of the euro being less valuable, when you report that back to the States, you're going to show 10% less US dollar revenue. And what if the Chinese yuan appreciates 10% against the dollar? Well, that means if you're a US company and you outsource production to China and you pay the bills in yuan, your cost just went up 10%. And lastly, what if the dollar appreciates 10% against all the major currencies? Well, that means US exports are 10% more expensive to the rest of the world, and exports will decline. Could be a situation where we enter in a recession. So, next section, we'll talk about forecasting exchange rates.